Rookie wide receiver Luther Burden is going to have to earn every opportunity he gets in this Chicago Bears offense, especially because I think Odunze is primed for a breakout year 2.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, I want to project out and set some expectations for 2025 for all of the Bears' wide receivers in particular, but you can't really talk about the wide receivers without at least including the tight ends and running backs in the conversation as part of the pass-catching weapons. But I do want to focus more specifically on Luther Burden and his rookie season, what we should expect in an offense that already has DJ Moore and Odunze, who I also want to focus in on for year 2. Like, how much of a jump should we expect when you add Colston Loveland into the mix, you add Luther Burden into the mix, DJ Moore still here, but in Ben Johnson's offense, how much of a difference will that make? And we'll kind of then circle back around to look bigger picture at where the ball goes, how they distribute the football to all of these different weapons this season under Ben Johnson. But let's start with Luther Burden, because he's the one that we have the least track record for, right? We don't have an NFL track record. We can't look back at what he did in the NFL last season to give us expectations for what he'll do this season. We can see how explosive and productive he was in college and translate those traits to the NFL. But I think for me and Luther Burden, it's less about what I think his skill set is capable of, which I think is a lot. I think he's really excited about him as a pick and a long-term wide receiver in this Bears offense. And it's more so about what kind of opportunity will actually be available to him with the Chicago Bears. Because he comes in not too dissimilarly from Odunze last year, very clearly number 3 on the wide receiver depth chart with a couple of very talented players ahead of him that you can't really expect him to unseat right away in year 1. DJ Moore is going to be the number 1 wide receiver for the Chicago Bears this season. Odunze is going to be the number 2 wide receiver for the Chicago Bears this season. And really, Luther Burden is just fighting off Olamide Zaccheaus and Tyler Scott and those guys to make sure he's the number 3, but there's not really a lot of room for him to move up at this point. Something would have to go horribly wrong with either DJ Moore or Odunze for Luther Burden to be anything more than the number 3 receiver in this Bears offense. Not due to any fault of his own, but just because of what the Bears already have at the position. And so if you go in with the metaphorical cap on Luther Burden's production that, hey, yeah, probably at best he's going to be third in terms of the targets among wide receivers, third in terms of catches and yards, right? That he's not going to finish above that spot. You can start to narrow in on a range of receiving production that is reasonable expectations, right? We shouldn't hear the kind of things we heard last year when it was DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Odunze talking about the race to 1,000 yards, where all 3 of them were shooting to hit 1,000 yards. That's not realistic to expect of Luther Burden. It wasn't really realistic to expect of Odunze in an offense that struggled to get to 3,000 yards total, let alone enough for 3 wide receivers to hit 3,000 yards this past season. So then where does that leave Luther Burden? I think there's a range of outcomes here, and I don't think even if he's on the lower side of the numbers, that's not as important to me as how he looks, right? How does he make big plays? Does he look like he belongs as a speedy, explosive NFL wide receiver who can make plays after the catch? Even if the total volume is low, is the efficiency high? Does he make the most out of the opportunities he does get? Because really, I want to narrow this down to recent rookie wide receivers who have been the number 3 receiver in their offense, and try and sort of use that as a stage for what to expect for Luther Burden based on what other rookie wide receivers in a similar position have done. So like you can't necessarily compare Luther Burden to, Brian Thomas or Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, right? Guys that came in and were number 1 or even number 2 receivers right away rookie season, because Luther Burden won't have those same opportunities. When I look at other recent highly drafted receivers that slotted into that number 3 role in the offense, I think Rome Odunze is kind of the ceiling for that. You haven't really seen any in the last couple of seasons, at least. I didn't go too many years back. You haven't seen very many wide receivers come in as a rookie, be the number 3rd wide receiver in their offense, and produce as much as Rome Odunze. 54 catches, 734 yards, and 3 touchdowns. The next closest had more catches, but fewer yards, and so fewer yards per reception. But the other comparison here is Jackson Smith-Njigba from the Seattle Seahawks, who we had talked about as a potential Bears draft pick in the 2023 class. Also a fairly similar situation as Luther Burden right now and Rome Odunze a year ago, where he gets drafted by Seattle in 2023 when they still had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And so there was never really a way, at least that rookie season, for Smith-Njigba to come in and unseat either of those guys. He was still a big part of the offense and had 63 catches for 628 yards, but they weren't talking about a race to 1,000 yards because it's really hard to get 3 guys to 1,000 yards, especially if you have any kind of other struggles on offense, or if you have tight ends, the caliber of Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet, that also becomes tricky. But this 600 to 700 yard range feels like the high end for what we could expect from Luther Burden. I might even be expecting too much of Luther Burden, right? That's pushing a little bit when you add in Loveland and Kmet that are going to eat into some of those yards. Whereas Odunze last year didn't have 2 tight ends taking his yards. He had 1. And you add in Colston Loveland, there's going to be some yards that needs to go around there. But some other recent rookie number 3 wide receivers. This past year, Keon Coleman with the Buffalo Bills was 3rd for them in targets. Still had 556 yards and 4 touchdowns, but only 29 catches. He was kind of a big play machine for them. And that stat line right there, I think would be a fine year for Luther Burden. When we think about the role in the offense, where DJ Moore and Rome Odunze are probably going to do the bread and butter stuff, but you can bring in Luther Burden and he can make big plays after the catch on screen balls. You can throw him deep passes and really take advantage of that speed. And I just think, he and Keon Coleman are not the same player at all. They could play the same type of role in this offense. And if Burden finished with 29 catches for 556 yards and 4 touchdowns, I think that would be a really fine rookie season. Or you look at Jalen McMillan in Tampa Bay as a rookie this past season. You still had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as very clearly a number 1 and number 2, but he still finished with 37 catches for 461 yards and 8 touchdowns in Tampa this past season. This is all kind of the range we're talking, anywhere from 450 to 750. It's kind of a wide range, I'll give you that. But I think if you can slot Burden in for, 500-ish yards and a small handful of touchdowns, I think that's a really fine start to his career. And it says more about the opportunity he's going to have as opposed to him not being good enough to have more yards or not being better by not having more yards. It's because the ball's just going to go to these other players. There's no shame in being not as good as DJ Moore and Rome Odunze in your wide receiver room. So that sort of gets the Luther Burden expectations hopefully in a more reasonable place ahead of any sort of I just hope we don't do the race to 1,000 yard talk again. That just made life harder, I think, for everybody involved and built up too much hype. But I am here to build up the hype for Rome Odunze. I do think this season is going to be a big step forward for Rome Odunze because of a lot of the same reasons we talk about with Luther Burden. It's more about opportunity, and you take what he did last year and give him the ball a bunch more, he's going to produce a bunch more as well. So we'll take a look at what we should expect from Rome Odunze and then how both of those fit in with the rest of the pieces on offense next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. There's nothing like the atmosphere of, say, an NBA playoff game where you can see every bucket and every moment feeling huge in person. That electricity in the arena is not matched. And with Gametime, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Gametime makes it easy to track down playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app can actually go down as tip-off gets closer, as people are trying to unload their tickets, and Gametime's last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. I love their all-in pricing. That means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay for. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So if we're putting Luther Burden in the, say, 500-ish yard range, where does that leave Rome Odunze? And I know I've been sort of already campaigning against the idea of like, hey, the race to 1,000-yard thing, let's not do that again. But I do think 1,000 yards for Rome Odunze and DJ Moore is not out of the question whatsoever, and is, dare I say, almost reasonable expectations. All three at 1,000 yards, absolutely not. But Odunze making the jump from 750-ish to 1,000, to me, is not at all out of the question, and the type of breakout I'm expecting from Rome Odunze, because we saw him capable of doing so already as a rookie, and now he's going to have even more opportunity to be able to do so now in year two. It's about what he did already and how his role in the offense is going to change. So when you look back at Rome Odunze's 2024 season, rookie year, he's kind of the third option behind DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. He's third in targets. He got more targets than Cole Kmet, I believe. So, he was very clearly kind of the third receiver role in this offense. But he led the Chicago Bears in yards per catch. Every time he caught the ball, he averaged 13.6 yards per reception. And that was in a Bears offense that generally struggled to move the ball. That was, 28th in points, 31st in total passing yards, 31st in net yards per attempt. So an offense that could not consistently muster up playmaking in the passing game or the running game, but especially in the passing game, Odunze was averaging more than a first down every time he caught the ball. Well more than a first down every time he caught the ball. And so it's reasonable to expect that going into year two, in a better offensive system, with a better offensive line, with even more quality players around him to take some of the attention away as well. I mean, you subtract Keenan Allen, but you add in Colston Loveland and Luther Burden and a passing scheme that will help get those guys more open. Presumably, you can expect Rome Odunze to, there's no reason his yards per reception should drop significantly. Maybe 13.6. He's not going to hit that exact number again, but can he hit 13 again? Can he hit 12.5, 12? He's still going to be able to, if he was capable of doing that in last year's bad offense, he should be more than capable of doing the same thing, or dare I say even better, in this year's improved offense. And so then it's just about how much you get him the ball. Because last year he had 54 catches for 734 yards. And a big part of the problem there was that, he had 101 targets, so he only caught about 55% of those targets because there were a lot of, inaccurate passes or, contested catches and situations like that. Not all drops, obviously, but just plays where the ball was trying to go his way and they just couldn't connect for whatever reason. But if he starts catching more of those, Caleb Williams starts hitting him on more of those, and just more targets means more catches going his way as he goes from the number 2 receiver role and volume, from the number 3 to the number 2 receiver volume, it's pretty easy to math your way to 1,000 yards pretty quickly if he's averaging 13.6 yards per catch. So he had 54 catches this past season. If he goes from 54 to 65 catches, just 11 more catches over the course of the season, 883 yards. To get to 1,000 yards on the year, he'd need 74 catches is all he would need at 13.6 yards per catch to get to 1,000 yards. That's fewer than 5 catches per game. It's 4 and change. Can we expect Rome Odunze to maybe get 4 catches or 4 to 5 catches per game? I don't think that's out of the question. Keenan Allen had 70 last season in this Bears offense. DJ Moore had 98. Yes, some of those catches are going to now have to go to, Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, right? There's going to be balls going around, and we'll talk about that distribution. But I don't think it's unreasonable to expect Rome Odunze to catch 75 passes. 4.5 catches per game is not asking him to be the new number one wide receiver, asking him to do something, crazy and out of reach. And if you can get 4.5 catches per game, he's a 1,000-yard receiver this year based on the yards per catch he was able to do in a much worse Bears offense. So I think he's really keyed up here to be successful, if he plays exactly as well as he played last year and just gets more catches, he's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver. And presumably, he's going to be improved from one year to the other and, have made stride in his games, route running and knowing the playbook and, just this sort of savvy, different aspects of playing wide receiver in the NFL, like no longer being a rookie. I'm not saying that talent-wise, he's going to take a huge jump, but I just think production-wise, he's almost, as long as he stays healthy, like he's going to take a huge jump because he's going from the number 3 wide receiver role to a number 2 wide receiver role. And that comes with, we'll get into exactly how much it comes with, but that comes with significantly more catches, significantly more targets and catches at roughly the same efficiency is going to get him a lot more yards. Like this is not some guy who had some crazy outlier season. Like, yeah, there are years where a guy might have, 20 yards per reception. And it's like, whoa, I don't know if he can hold up that every single season. Like this past year, we talked about Keon Coleman of the Bills. He averaged 19 yards per reception as a rookie. It would be reasonable to say, yeah, that number might come down a little bit. As you give him more catches, it might be a little bit less efficient as you increase volume. But like 13 for Rome Odunze is not some crazy number that's going to be unsustainable. Like that's a pretty reasonable high-end production from a number 1 or number 2 wide receiver in your offense. And I think he can, if not exactly 13.6, 13, 12 and a half, and then you're still averaging about the same amount of catches per game to get you to 1,000 yards. I think he can even go above. Like 5 catches per game is 1,156 yards at this rate. Like I think the breakout is absolutely there for Rome Odunze. I don't want to say regardless of Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, but I'd say in spite of Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, because I think that's not going to slow down Rome Odunze here. Like he was already doing this as a number 3 receiver. Like it's not like having Keenan Allen and Cole Kmet and DJ Moore was keeping him from being productive with the catches he did get. This is just letting him get now more of those catches. But it is going to be a challenge to get all of the receivers involved properly because this is a set of weapons that Ben Johnson never had in Detroit. He had some good receivers and like one good tight end at a time, but he's never had this combination of 3 good receivers that you want to get the ball to and 2 good tight ends that you want to get the ball to, plus running back that you want to get the ball to in the passing game in addition to the running game. He's never quite had this exact mixture. So there's not a perfect Detroit Lions comparison to say, well, just look how the Lions did in this year and that's what we can expect for the Bears this year. But we can use some of his general trends as a jumping off point to say, okay, well, like how much is DJ Moore going to get the ball versus Rome Odunze versus Luther Burden versus Colston Loveland versus Cole Kmet versus DeAndre Swift? And there's one particular aspect of the Lions offense that is very different than what we've seen the Bears do. And we'll be curious to see how Ben Johnson adjusts that for the Bears. But we'll go through what the different expectations should be for sharing all of the targets around this Bears offense next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, all experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with that talent across multiple industries. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a legitimate long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, you can get an expert to deliver incredible results. You can, instead of hiring full-time, you can find these affordable freelancers to scale your business effectively, and posting a job is free and simple. And within a day, multiple qualified candidates are available to choose from. So visit Upwork.com right now to post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today. So how do you start to put all of these different puzzle pieces together? It's like, okay, if Luther Burden can be maybe a 500-yard-ish receiver and Rome Odunze might be pushing for 1,000. Like, okay, there's 1,500 of your passing yards. And then you probably expect DJ Moore to be a 1,000-yard receiver at least. So that's 2,500 yards of your passing game. And even if you go like up to 4,000 yards for Caleb Williams, like, okay, that leaves you 1,500 yards to split between Kmet, Colston Loveland, and DeAndre Swift out of the backfield. And, is that 500, 500, 500, or is that, 7, 6, 3, or that'd be 7-6-2 at that point, or like 6-5-4. Like how you want to split that up becomes a tricky split here. And I'll say right now on the front end, like there's not a definitive answer here, right? You can't look at the Lions offense and say, okay, well, if Amon-Ra St. Brown had this many yards and Jameson Williams had this many yards and Sam Laporta had this many yards, then you can equate that to what the Bears have and make it work. Because as I said before, the Lions didn't have this mixture of weapons. You look at how the Lions offense last season distributed its passing targets. They barely ever threw to the number 2 tight end. That's kind of the big difference here. Brock Wright had, I think, like 10 targets last season, something along those lines, like, less than 1 per game. He was not a significant contributor to their offense. It was around like 4% of their targets, or a little bit less last season. And so trying to take then what the Lions did with 1 tight end and 3 wide receivers and stretch that out to 3 wide receivers and 2 tight ends in Chicago doesn't quite math perfectly. And the other aspect of this that's very different than what we're used to in Chicago is Ben Johnson got both Lions running backs fairly significantly involved in the passing game. That Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously, I think we kind of know as a pass catching back out of the backfield. But David Montgomery was, I don't think people realize how much of a contributor to the passing game he was last year as their number 2 running back. Like it wasn't like he was blowing anybody out of the water, but he had 36 catches for 341 yards. Like David Montgomery had more catches than the Lions' number 3 wide receiver, Tim Patrick. Like in terms of catches, it was wide receiver 1, tight end 1, wide receiver 2, running back 1, running back 2, wide receiver 3. Like the second running back had more catches than the number 3 wide receiver. But now in Chicago, I don't think Roschon Johnson is that caliber of a pass catching threat out of the backfield, that Roschon Johnson shouldn't get a David Montgomery's share of passes in the passing game. And I also think Luther Burden should get a greater share of passes in the passing game than perhaps what Tim Patrick got this past season. Like Tim Patrick's a fine NFL wide receiver for sure, like player that we talked about the Bears potentially signing, but Luther Burden has the type of skill set that you'd like to get him more involved as a number 3 wide receiver than what the Lions got their number 3 wide receiver involved with. So like when you look at the Bears, the target share last year, like just to give you a comparison point, was very obvious. Like DJ Moore got the most, Keenan Allen got the second most, Rome Odunze was 3rd, Cole Kmet 4th, Jahmyr Gibbs 5th, and then Roschon Johnson was actually 4th in terms of target share because the Bears also didn't have a number 2 tight end worth anything last season. So by default, number 2 running back was kind of last in terms of the offensive pecking order. But in Detroit, it's like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, 1, 2, 3. And then Jahmyr Gibbs, Tim Patrick, David Montgomery. But the Bears now have like 6 of these guys they want to get involved. So you have to, Amon-Ra St. Brown and DJ Moore last season had a similar percentage of their team's targets. You can kind of expect DJ Moore's role to stay the same. Now, like Jameson Williams compared to Keenan Allen, Allen got a lot more targets, and Rome Odunze got a lot more targets than Tim Patrick. The Bears threw the ball to wide receivers a lot more than the Lions, and the Lions threw the ball to running backs and tight ends a lot more than the Bears. And so should we expect Ben Johnson's offense to throw the ball less to wide receivers in Chicago, kind of like he did in Detroit, and throw the ball more to tight ends and running backs like he did in Detroit? Well, I don't think he's going to just force Roschon Johnson into a bigger passing game role because I think in Detroit, he looked at his offense and said, let me get the ball into the best players' hands. And who's most talented? St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Laporta, Gibbs. And then probably Dave Montgomery's probably next there. Like it felt like kind of a meritocracy of like best weapons get the ball in the order that the talent dictates there, right? Like you think about if you had to split up the slices of the pie here, give the biggest slices to the best players and the smallest slices to the worst players. Ben Johnson did that pretty well. It was pretty balanced across the kind of talent you would want to see the ball. And so that's where I think we can try and project a little bit for the Bears. Not so much that Bears running backs are going to get the same as Lions running backs or Bears tight ends are going to get the same as Lions tight ends, but that the Bears' third best weapon at any position, maybe that's going to get about what the Lions' third best weapon got at any position. Like if you take away the positions and just rank them all as weapons, maybe then you can start to figure out who's going to get what kind of target share here. And so I wasn't planning on doing like a Bears weapon power ranking right now, but like I think today DJ Moore is number 1, Rome Odunze is number 2 in terms of weapons you want to most get the ball to right now. Number 3, then that's where it gets tricky for me because we don't know. Like in theory, if Colston Loveland is your top 10 pick in the draft, you want him to be number 3 here. I think though, like day one, Cole Kmet is probably number 3 here, but by the end of the season, Colston Loveland should probably be the third biggest threat on your offense there, and then Colston Loveland and Kmet probably are 3 and 4 there and switch, and then is Luther Burden 5 or is DeAndre Swift 5? Because clearly, Roschon Johnson's going to be 6 here, but like it is, or I guess that would be 7 if I'm doing my math right here. Like I guess probably, I find myself saying Luther Burden, then DeAndre Swift, but Ben Johnson has always had a propensity to throw the ball to running backs. And I think based on history, I think DeAndre Swift is likely to see more targets than Luther Burden. And I'm expecting that Burden will have more yards, but he's also going to have more yards per catch, like fewer catches, fewer targets, but more total yards because Burden's going to have big explosive plays, 30, 40-yard bombs and then screen passes where he catches and runs and takes off down the sideline. Like I think he's going to have some big explosive plays that keep his catch numbers down, but his yards number high. Whereas I think DeAndre Swift out of the backfield is going to have a lot of catches, but a much lower yards per reception. And so how you want to split out the targets there and the percentages are sort of nitpicking at some point there. But I think the offense is going to flow through Moore and Odunze, and then the tight ends, and then the running back, and then probably Luther Burden. And that's where I again, kind of want to tamper expectations a little bit, just a little bit, for Luther Burden, not race for 1,000 yards. Like 500 yards, given that all these other guys are going to be interested in getting yards out of him, is a perfectly reasonable expectation. Even 400 yards is not a bad year for Luther Burden in year 1 because of where he is in the pecking order. And that pecking order may change over the course of the season. It's not going to be locked in stone, and it's going to change next offseason. But I think that's the way to kind of think about it. Best players are going to get the ball the most. We heard Ben Johnson say, like, no block, no rock. The players who run their routes hard and who do everything the coaches ask of them away from the ball are the ones who are going to earn the most opportunities with the ball. So as long as DJ Moore does that the way he's expected to, he's going to get the ball the most. As long as Rome Odunze does that the way he's expected to, he's going to get the ball the most. And whoever doesn't do it, or if anybody doesn't do it, then they're going to get the ball a lot less. And we're going to know exactly why. Like I think Ben Johnson's pretty good at scheming up the offense and putting players in different spots in the progression. So generally, the distribution is the way they want it to. Not that you're forcing the ball to anybody, but just sort of how the structures of the plays work. It makes it more likely that one player versus another is going to get the ball at any given time, and you sort of spread those out and space those out over the course of the game. So, well, it's not like an exact order and an exact projection. I hope that gives you a better sense of like not only what to expect from Luther Burden and Rome Odunze, but how the target share of this offense may get spread around between all of these players. If the Bears do end up still adding another running back into the mix, that could change some things. A better pass catcher out of the backfield than Roschon Johnson to be a number 2. Certainly, if that happens, which it's not going to happen right away or anytime immediately, but if and when it does happen, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to help. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Make Locked On Bears your first listen once again tomorrow, because we are going to break down the Bears' undrafted rookie free agents and who has the best chance to make the 53-man roster. I've been kind of trying to wait for rookie minicamp and getting to see the whole rookie minicamp roster, but because it's coming up this weekend, I want to get something out at least ahead of time so we know a little bit more about these undrafted free agents before we start seeing clips and videos and analysis of them from rookie minicamp. So undrafted free agent talk tomorrow. Make us your first listen once again there. Then Monday, same thing. We'll break down everything we learned from rookie minicamp. And each time that you tune in to Locked On Bears, you get another opportunity to bear down.